New Year's Eve. To save up some extra money for buying my wife a handbag, I took an order to visit and take care of a pet. When I arrived at the place, I was shocked to discover the dog in front of me looked exactly the same as the one I had at home. When the dog saw me, it excitedly leapt toward me, its mouth barking loudly, making endless noise. Suspicion filled my heart. On the phone, the owner was still talking nonstop. Ding is quite shy around strangers. You'll need to be patient. Every meal must include meat. Right after that, I heard him add, "This is my girlfriend's precious pet. If anything happens to it, you'll have to deal with me." But at that moment, a sweet, delicate female voice came through. "Honey, what's wrong? Let's get started. I can't wait anymore." And that voice, familiar beyond belief, was none other than my wife's. Listening to the ambiguous sounds between the two on the phone, I felt an icy chill run through my body. Ding Dang seemed to sense my emotions, circling around me restlessly. I crouched down to comfort it, but my heart felt heavy, as if stuffed with cotton. After a moment's thought, I dialed her number. The phone rang for a long time before it was answered. On the other end came the unsteady voice of Liu Ryan. "Hello, darling. What's up? Is there something you need from me?" I steadied myself, pretending everything was normal as I replied, "Nothing. What time will you arrive this afternoon? I'll pick you up at the airport." Liu Ryan's voice was slightly muffled. "I still have some matters to deal with here. It'll probably be very late. You don't need to pick me up." "Oh, I can't talk anymore. My boss is calling me into a meeting. I'll hang up now." She ended the call abruptly before I could respond. She was lying. Just a second ago, I distinctly heard a man's affectionate voice on the other end. I smiled bitterly, stroking Ding Dang's fur. Yesterday, she told me she had a business trip to a neighboring city. Today, she promised she'd return in time for our family reunion dinner. But now, it seemed, she was going to break that promise. I spent the entire day at the villa. It wasn't until evening, after settling Ding Dang, that I returned to my parents' home. During that time, I called her a few more times. She didn't pick up any of them. I had no choice but to send her a message, asking her to come straight to my parents' house after landing. That night, we waited until 9 p.m., but she still hadn't returned. Yet in the client's social media post, I saw her. Our 10th New Year's Eve together. From now on, we'll spend every New Year's Eve together. The accompanying photo showed two people holding hands, forming a heart shape. Their love seemed to overflow from the screen. My vision blurred slightly. I suddenly recalled how every past New Year's Eve, she had always used a business trip as an excuse to be away. In nearly 10 years of marriage, we had never spent a single New Year's Eve together. And all this time, I had pitied her for being so busy with work, so she had been busy spending time with someone else. When I got home in the early morning, Liu Ryan was already back. She rushed over to me as soon as she saw me, clinging to me sweetly and acting coquettishly. "Honey, you're back. Did Mom and Dad blame me for not joining the reunion dinner? It's all the client's fault. They suddenly caused a mess and insisted it had to be resolved before I could leave. Otherwise, I would have made it in time." She complained to me, just like she always did, only realizing after a while that I hadn't said a word. She looked at me in confusion. "Honey, what's wrong? You don't look happy." I fixed my gaze on her, gently pulling her arms away from holding me. "It's nothing. I'm just a bit tired today." My expression made her slightly uneasy. She wrapped her arms around my waist again. "Honey, are you upset? I really didn't mean to not come back earlier. I'm just working hard for our family, that's all. I promise you, once the new year is over, I'll quit my job, stay home, and prepare to have a baby for you. How does that sound?" Looking at her serious expression, I felt my heart soften a little. If she truly intended to return to the family, could I really pretend nothing had happened? Just as I was about to say something, Liu Ryan's phone suddenly rang. She glanced at the screen, then put the phone back down. I knew exactly who was calling. Feigning ignorance, I asked, "Whose call was that? Why didn't you answer it?" She hesitated for a moment, then wrapped her arms around my waist again. "It was just a telemarketing call, nothing important. Let's ignore it. It's midnight now. Honey, I love you. From now on, every year we must be together." Her words were accompanied by fireworks lighting up the sky. I turned my head to look out the window. Tonight's fireworks were beautiful, but I no longer had the heart to admire them. Liu Ryan noticed my distraction, looking at me with concern. "Honey, what's really wrong with you? You've been acting strange all evening. Are you still mad because I didn't pick up your calls?" At the time, I was on the plane. By the time I saw your message, it was already late. I didn't want to disturb Mom and Dad's rest, so I didn't go over. Please don't be angry, okay? She looked at me with tearful eyes, her tone soft and pleading. In the past, whenever she upset me, she would always use this tactic. I never had any resistance to her coquettish charm. But this time, her efforts were futile. Even her strongest approach couldn't shake me. I gently pushed her away. My tone was calm and indifferent. "I've already told you. I'm just really tired tonight. Go to bed early. Good night." She watched my back as I walked away, silent for a long time. Tonight, I was undeniably different from usual. In the past, no matter how late or tired I was, I would always stay up with her to welcome the new year. But this time, I didn't even mention it. She pondered for a long time, but couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. Just then, her phone rang. It was a call from Stanley. She answered it. "Hey, sweetheart, why did it take you so long to answer my call? Were you asleep?" She frowned, her tone sharp. "Stanley, I've already told you. Don't call me when I'm at home. Haven't you learned your lesson? What if Jinli finds out? Have you ever thought about that?" Stanley was silent for a moment, his voice sounding slightly aggrieved. "I just wanted to spend New Year's Eve with you. If you don't like it, I won't call next time." Liu Ryan's heart softened. Her tone eased. "Alright, I wasn't really blaming you. You know how much I love Jin Lee. I can't let him find out about this. If he ever discovers it, he'll definitely divorce me. It's late. Get some rest." I hid in the shadows, watching. Before she hung up, I slipped back into the bedroom and pretended to be asleep. The heater in the room was turned up high, yet I felt nothing but cold. She spoke of loving me, but behind my back, she continued betraying me. A knife to the back hurts the most. The next day, I returned to my parents' house. She wanted to come along, but I stopped her. Mom and Dad always say they feel lonely with just the two of them at home. This is the perfect chance for me to spend more time with them during the new year. "You should focus on work. I'll go alone. I don't want them to worry about interrupting your work." My words were flawless. Liu Ryan didn't suspect anything and agreed without hesitation. "Alright, send my regards to Mom and Dad for me. I'll visit them in a couple of days." Back at my parents' house, I turned on my computer. I pulled up the surveillance footage from home. Last night, while Liu Ryan was asleep, I had secretly installed a camera in the house. Everything was already painfully clear, but without seeing it with my own eyes, a small sliver of hope still lingered in my heart. That hope shattered the moment a man appeared on the footage. It was the same man who had hired me to feed Ding Ding. As soon as they met, sparks ignited dry wood catching fire, and they fell into each other's arms instantly. I watched the footage for a long time, torturing myself. I even recorded it on my phone. After their intimacy ended, they talked for hours, probably saying more to each other in one night than Liu Ryan and I had said in an entire year. We used to talk endlessly too, but those conversations gradually faded away. Eventually, silence took their place. I consulted a lawyer friend about divorce proceedings. I already had enough evidence in hand. Forcing Liu Ryan to leave with nothing wouldn't be difficult. But after so many years together, facing the finality of such a step, I wasn't entirely sure. For 5 whole days, Liu Ryan didn't come over. The man stayed at our house for those 5 days. Every day, I sat smoking, watching them being affectionate on the surveillance footage. My heart had been shattered into pieces. On the 6th day, Liu Ryan finally arrived. She walked in with a bright smile, greeting my parents warmly. "Mom, Dad, Happy New Year. I came to see you." Then she turned to me. "Honey, did you miss me? I've been so busy these past few days. The client had so many demands. I stayed up late last night finishing everything and rushed straight here." I responded with a faint hem. My parents, however, were full of concern. "Go get some rest, dear." "It's fine, Mom. I've already spoken to my boss. This year, I'm planning to prepare for pregnancy. I'll give you a chubby grandson." My parents beamed with joy, their smiles wide and bright. "Really? That's wonderful. Let me go kill a chicken and make you something nourishing." Liu Ryan smiled sweetly at me. "Jin Lee, let's have a baby, shall we?" I wasn't mature enough before, but now I've thought it through. When we first got married, I had brought up the idea of having children. Back then, she dismissed it, saying we were still too young. She refused, claiming she wasn't ready. A few years later, when I mentioned it again, she said our careers were still unstable. It wasn't the right time. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up altogether. I never expected her to bring it up now, voluntarily. Seeing me remain silent, she shook my arm gently. "What do you think? Look, even Mom and Dad are so happy. Why do you still look so serious?" My parents had always longed for a grandchild. Over the years, they had hinted at it both subtly and directly. Now that there was finally a sign of hope, they were naturally overjoyed. But the image from the surveillance footage resurfaced in my mind, and a wave of nausea hit me. Was she genuinely planning to have a child with me? Or was she just making me a fully convenient caretaker for someone else's child? I didn't want to think about it anymore. "Alright then, let's have one." She leaned her head happily against my shoulder, her face full of bliss. "In the future, there will be a little one like you or me, always by our side every day. Just imagine how heartwarming that would be. You'll definitely be a great dad." This was something I had once dreamed of, but now it no longer mattered to me. She noticed my indifference, but didn't think much of it, assuming I was still upset with her. "By the way, I think I haven't gotten my period this month. Could it be that I'm pregnant?" I heard the tension in her voice, like a prisoner anxiously awaiting judgment. I glanced at her and played along with her insinuation. "Then let's go to the hospital for a checkup, just to be sure." She contained her excitement and accompanied me to the hospital for the examination. The results were in. She was already a month pregnant. That time coincided with one of her business trips. We had only been intimate once before her departure, and the next day, she told me her period had arrived, so the child couldn't possibly be mine. She seemed to have forgotten all about that, her face glowing with excitement as she held the ultrasound report, examining it over and over. "It's real, I'm pregnant. The doctor says the baby is very healthy. We're going to have a baby." Looking at her deceitful expression, I suddenly felt like I couldn't keep pretending any longer. I interrupted her mid-sentence. "Aren't you tired of pretending for so long?" She froze. "Let's get a divorce." She looked up at me in shock. "What did you say?" Liu Ryan couldn't believe her ears. She repeated the question. "What did you just say? I'm pregnant, and you still want to divorce me?" I looked at her calmly, my tone indifferent. "You know better than anyone whose child it is. There's no need to beat around the bush." A flicker of panic flashed across her face, but she quickly masked it. "Honey, what are you talking about? It's not even close to April Fool's Day. Stop joking around." She walked over, trying to hold my hand. but her trembling fingers betrayed her inner turmoil. You must be overjoyed and losing your head. That's why you're speaking nonsense. Come on, let's talk about this at home. I followed her home without protest. Once inside, I placed the video of her and Stanley in front of her. Her face turned pale. She stayed silent, sitting quietly on the couch, staring at me. After a long while, she finally asked, "When did you find out?" On the way home, she had thought a lot. Knowing my personality, she understood I wouldn't say such things without evidence. It could only mean that her affair had been discovered. Even if she and Stanley weren't yet aware of it, I kept my answer brief. On New Year's Eve, when I saw Ding Ding, Liu Ryan was momentarily dazed. Ding Ding was the dog we had raised together. 6 months ago, Stanley had said he felt lonely living alone, so she often took Ding Ding to his place, always giving me the excuse that the dog was at the pet store. What she never expected was that such a small act would lead to her downfall. It exposed their affair. I took a deep breath, but the pain in my heart didn't subside. There was nothing more to say. Let's get a divorce. Unexpectedly, she rejected it outright. No way! I won't agree to a divorce. I looked at her in astonishment, unable to understand what was going through her mind. You cheated on me. Why won't you agree to a divorce? Without me, you two could finally be together openly, couldn't you? Her demeanor softened, and her tone grew desperate. Jin Lee, I never wanted to leave you. Being with him was just to help him. You're the one I love the most. I stayed silent as I listened to her recount their story. It turned out that Stanley was her first love. They had lost contact after going to college, shortly after she and I got together. Stanley had reached out to her. He had been diagnosed with a terminal illness and didn't have long to live. He hoped they could relive their past, being together like a couple again. Out of nostalgia for their old relationship, Liu Ryan agreed. But she couldn't let go of her feelings for me either. So she married me while secretly seeing him. Over the years, because of Stanley, Liu Ryan had never wanted to have a child with me. Until 2 months ago, when Stanley expressed a desire for a child. That's when she conceived this idea. In fact, even now, she didn't know for certain whose child it was. Or perhaps, to her, it didn't matter who the child's father was. After all, Stanley would soon die. Once he was gone, the child's only father would be me. Since Stanley wouldn't live much longer, all his inheritance would become ours. You're not losing anything. In fact, you'll gain so much wealth. Shouldn't you be happy? After hearing her explanation, I was utterly dumbfounded. How did I ever fall for someone with such a warped mindset? Someone cheats on me, and you think I should thank him? Liu Ryan didn't see anything wrong with her logic. She nodded confidently. Of course. Look, you'll not only have a child, but you'll also get a fortune. In the end, you'll have both a wife and a child. What's there to be dissatisfied about? Her skewed worldview left me completely speechless. How could I have been blind enough to marry her? The scariest part was that, for a moment, I almost thought she made sense. I quickly shook my head, forcing my principles back into alignment. Let someone else have this great deal. Forgive me, but I can't agree. Seeing that I remained unmoved, she grew frustrated. I've explained so much and you still don't understand? Do you really have to tear this family apart to be satisfied? Please. The feudal era is long gone. Stop being so old-fashioned, will you? No matter what she said, I held firm to my principles. Read the divorce agreement carefully. If there's no issue, just sign it. Aside from this, I have nothing more to say. In a fit of rage, she tore the divorce papers into pieces. In your dreams. I will never agree to a divorce. Even if I die, I'll die with you. With that, she covered her face and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. To anyone unaware of the situation, it looked like I was the one bullying her. People outside began pointing fingers at me. How could you drive your wife away on New Year's? Go after her and apologize. What are you standing there for? I heard them arguing earlier. Could it be domestic violence? Did she run away because she couldn't take it anymore? Treat your wife better, or you'll end up with nothing when she leaves. My expression darkened with frustration. Noticing the onlookers, Liu Ryan played her part even better. Her face full of tears as she gazed at me silently. The clueless crowd grew even more agitated. It's New Year's and you're still trying to hit her? Is there no justice left in the world? Don't worry, girl. We'll stand up for you. If anyone dares lay a finger on you today, they'll have to deal with all of us. Exactly. Do you think we'll let one man intimidate us? The crowd's righteous anger boiled over, as if I had committed an unforgivable crime. They glared at me like I was a monster. Seeing the chaos spiraling out of control, Liu Ryan peeked out from behind someone, her face still wearing an innocent expression. I never said he hit me. You all really have such wild imaginations. We're just having a marital argument. It's just, he wants a divorce. Please, could you help me convince him not to? The crowd were expressions as if they had just swallowed a fly. No one responded to her. She was still oblivious to what was happening, continuing to ramble about how pitiful she was. But as she went on, the silence from the crowd became deafening. She finally sensed something was off. Awkwardly, she asked, "Why are you all looking at me like that? Is there something on my face?" She quickly wiped her face with her hand, but found nothing there. Yet the crowd still stared at her like she was a fool. At last, she realized where the problem lay. She fell silent and said no more. Seeing Liu Ryan finally quiet down, I apologized to the crowd and went back inside to pack my things. She followed me step by step. Jin Lee, are you really going to leave? Have you thought about what I'll do without you? I can't even use the gas stove. I don't know how to use the washing machine either. Without you, I can't survive. I let out a bitter sigh in my heart. I started questioning my own judgment. This delicate princess. It'd take 10 years of my life just to recover from the damage she's done. Halfway through packing, the doorbell suddenly rang. It was Stanley. Liu Ryan didn't greet him with her usual excitement. Instead, she frowned and said, "Why are you here at this hour? If there's nothing urgent, just go back. Don't disturb me and my husband's time together." Stanley stepped inside, carrying Ding Dang in his arms. Stanley explained, "Ding Dang seems sick. I knew he was lethargic and had no energy, so I brought him over. Don't worry. As soon as I'm sure he's okay, I'll leave." Upon hearing this, Liu Ryan panicked, forgetting everything else. She grabbed Ding Dang into her arms and shouted anxiously at me, "Jin Lee, hurry! Ding Dang is sick. Come and see what's wrong." I rushed out, took one look at Ding Dang. He was lying weakly on the ground, barely breathing, his chest rising faintly. When he saw me, his tail wagged weakly a couple of times, before drooping lifelessly again. Stanley glanced at me, but remained silent, standing off to the side. I knelt down to examine Ding Dang. After a quick inspection, I frowned and stood up. I can't handle this here. We need to get him to the hospital immediately. It looks like he ate something toxic. He'll need gastric lavage right away. Liu Ryan was already in a state of complete panic, her hands trembling and her voice frantic. How did this happen? Ding Dang, please, you must be okay. If anything happens to you, how will I live with myself? Ding Dang had been with us for almost 10 years. To Liu Ryan, he was like her own child. More important than anything else. She could do nothing but cry helplessly. Stanley stood there, completely detached, as if none of this concerned him. Left with no choice, I picked up Ding Dang and drove him to the animal hospital for treatment. Fortunately, after timely medical intervention, he was out of danger. The vet held up a pile of undigested food, frowning and scolding us. Dogs cannot eat chocolate. How could you not know such basic common sense? This time, you were lucky to bring him in on time. If you had been any later, not even a god could have saved him. Liu Ryan was stunned. She froze momentarily, then suddenly turned to Stanley, her face filled with anger. You fed him chocolate? Haven't I told you before that he can't eat that? Stanley shrank back, muttering defensively. I left it on the table. He went and ate it on his own. How is that my fault? The vet let out an exasperated laugh, mercilessly exposing his lie. Dogs are naturally sensitive to chocolate. They usually won't even go near it. So how could he have eaten it on his own? Stanley was left speechless, but still stubbornly tried to argue. Can you guarantee that's true for every dog? Anyway, he ate it himself. Believe it or not, it's up to you. The vet, clearly fed up, dismissed him and gave us further instructions. Feed him easy-to-digest liquids for the next few days. Be extra cautious. Take good care of him. Liu Ryan nodded quickly. After the vet left, she shot Stanley a fierce glare. Look at what you've done. But her tone lacked real anger. It was evident that she was extremely lenient when it came to Stanley. She went to the recovery room to check on Ding Dang. Left alone with Stanley, we stared at each other in silence. After a moment, he broke it first. Well, I didn't expect you to be so composed. After everything done, you're still holding it together. You truly are a master of restraint. Adaptable, aren't you? I didn't say a word. I just lit another cigarette, one after another, silently smoking. In truth, I had already suspected that what happened on New Year's Eve wasn't a coincidence. That he placed an order and I just happened to accept it. And they just happened to be together at that exact moment. Too many coincidences point to deliberate planning. It was a trap carefully laid by Stanley. His goal was clear: to make sure I discovered Liu Ryan's affair. And his motive? It wasn't hard to guess. Seeing me remain silent, he continued talking on his own. We've known each other for so many years. Why did you get to have her instead of me? If it weren't for you, Liu Ryan and I would have been married long ago. The most infuriating part is that she's willing to be with me, but she refuses to divorce you. I've had enough of this secret relationship, hiding in the shadows. I was the first in her life, yet I'm forced to rot in the dark corners of her world. While you get to stand in the sunlight, enjoying everything she has to offer. Why? Stanley's face was twisted with resentment. His eyes were filled with hatred as he glared at me. Tell me, why? Why is it you and not me? Huh? I finished my last cigarette, snuffed out the butt, and finally looked him in the eye. No matter how many excuses you give yourself, you interfering in someone else's marriage is wrong. A mistress is a mistress, even if you take the throne. So what? Be the shameful, unspeakable one. He froze for a moment, then burst into hysterical laughter. Ha ha ha. Are you even listening to yourself? What's wrong with a mistress taking the throne? Ryan is already pregnant with my child. What about you? After all these years of marriage, you couldn't even manage that. If I were you, I'd leave with my tail between my legs. People would laugh themselves silly if they knew. I didn't react to his words, and no waves stirred in my heart. Trash I don't want anymore. You're welcome to pick it up, as long as you don't regret it. He shot to his feet, pointing a finger at me. Who are you calling trash? You're the trash. We're all trash. I gave him a long, meaningful look, a faint smile curling at my lips. Suit yourself. I had finally realized Stanley and Liu Ryan were a perfect match. Their twisted minds were in perfect harmony. When Liu Ryan returned, she was greeted by the strange tension lingering between Stanley and me. She quickly broke the awkward silence. What's going on with you two? The vet said Ding Dang needs to stay overnight for observation. We can pick him up tomorrow. I nodded, stood up, and started walking out. Liu Ryan followed after me. Jin Lee, I'll go home with you. I refused coldly. No, I'm going back to my parents' house. You can take a cab back yourself. A flash of disappointment crossed her face. She forced a smile. I understand. Drive safely. Take care on the road. Let me know when you're coming back. I'll come to pick you up. Stanley, unwilling to accept defeat, watched as I walked away. Ryan, he doesn't even care about you. Why are you being so good to him? Why not just divorce him and marry me instead? After all, you're already ... Before he could finish, Liu Ryan slapped him hard across the face. Her gaze turned icy. I've warned you before not to have such thoughts. I'm only with you because of our past connection. When you're gone, I'll live my life properly with Jin Lee. The child is definitely Jin Lee's. Don't even think otherwise. Stanley lowered his eyes, hiding the venomous resentment in his gaze. I understand. It was my mistake. Liu Ryan nodded in satisfaction, not pressing him further. I know you're upset, but there's no other choice. Since Jin Lee won't be back for a few days, why don't you move in with me for now? Stanley instantly lit up, as if he'd been injected with adrenaline. All right, I'll go home and get my things right away. Watching him act like an overjoyed child, Liu Ryan couldn't help but smile. But deep down, she felt a sense of melancholy. She didn't know how to balance her relationship with me and Stanley. She wanted to help Stanley fulfill his last wishes, but she also wanted to preserve her relationship with me. Even now, she couldn't figure out what her feelings for Stanley truly were. Was it love? Or was it simply the dissatisfaction of a youthful love left unfulfilled? After confronting Liu Ryan, I moved to my parents' house and started contacting a lawyer to prepare for the divorce proceedings. A few days passed, and when Liu Ryan saw that I still hadn't returned, she came looking for me. Jin Lee, when are you planning to come home? I'm scared being alone at home. My parents were unaware of the situation, and seeing her standing outside in the freezing winter, they quickly ushered her in. You're pregnant. Why aren't you taking better care of yourself? What if something happens to the baby? Her eyes immediately reddened, tears welling up and streaming down her face. Mom, Dad, Jin Lee is mad at me. He left me all alone. I had no choice but to come looking for him. Please, can you help me convince him? Ask him to come home with me. My parents, still in the dark about the truth, instinctively assumed I was at fault. They immediately turned their disapproval toward me, frowning as they scolded. Jin Lee, what's wrong with you? How can a grown man be mad at his pregnant wife? Aren't you ashamed to talk about this in public? Eat your meal and then get back home with her. Just looking at you irritates me. A flash of triumph flickered in Liu Ryan's eyes, but her face remained pitifully innocent, her expression one of grievance. She played the victim perfectly. It was clear that some things couldn't be left unexplained any longer. I showed my parents the surveillance footage from home. Your wonderful daughter-in-law isn't lacking for company. After all, there's someone else waiting for her back at the house. Liu Ryan's face turned pale the moment she saw the footage. Her eyes widened in disbelief. You installed surveillance cameras in the house to spy on me? Thinking about all the intimate moments she had shared with Stanley, now all captured on camera. Her anger surged uncontrollably. Her fury instantly overshadowed everything else. She slapped me hard across the face. You're shameless. I'm going to sue you for invading my privacy. I licked the blood from the corner of my mouth. Completely unfazed, I installed cameras in my own living room. What's the problem? If you hadn't done anything wrong, how could I have caught you red-handed? Go ahead and sue me. Let's see if anyone takes you seriously. Liu Ryan paused, trying to calm down. She finally realized the situation. Fine, you win. My mom was utterly stunned, unable to process the scene as she watched Liu Ryan storm out, slamming the door behind her. Who was that man? Why does Ryan bring anyone and everyone into the house? My dad and I exchanged a look, both speechless. It was only then that she understood. Oh my God, so she's the one cheating on you. And after being caught, she refused to divorce you. Then, when you weren't home, She even brought her lover into the house. That's outrageous. And the baby in her belly ... It's not yours, is it? I nodded. Seeing her relieved expression made me chuckle a bit. What's this? Hearing that your future grandchild isn't mine. You're not mad? Why do you look almost happy about it? My mom glared at me. Oh, stop it. A child born to a woman like her wouldn't be much better. If she were carrying my grandchild, that's what would scare me. One bad apple spoils the whole barrel. If that happened, our family's legacy would be ruined for 3 generations. My dad nodded in agreement. Exactly. When choosing a wife, you should have picked someone like your mom. I told you I didn't agree when you wanted to marry her. See? Turns out I was right all along. Dad puffed up with pride again. Mom, hearing herself praised, beamed with delight. Now, you finally understand how great I am, don't you? Back in the day, I had suitors lining up. You were lucky to get me. Dad quickly planted a kiss on her cheek. Of course I know that. That's why I've always treated you like a treasure. Have I ever let you suffer even the slightest grievance? The two of them started getting lovey-dovey again as they talked. I covered my face and ran back to my room. I just couldn't stand how they'd start showing off their love out of nowhere. I grew up in a home filled with love, but my parents often got so caught up in each other that they forgot about me. That's why I've always longed to have a child of my own, to raise them, to guide them. But the circumstances shouldn't be like this. When Liu Ryan heard my words, she broke down a little. How can you be so sure the child isn't yours? Why would you divorce me over this? I won't agree to it. This isn't something you can decide on a whim. The judge wasn't swayed by her dramatics. He sternly called out, "Order in the court. This is the mediation phase. Both parties need to manage their emotions." Liu Ryan flinched in surprise, quickly swallowing her tears. Despite the mediator's efforts to persuade both sides, neither could convince me to abandon the divorce, nor could they get Liu Ryan to agree to it. Thus, the mediation failed. The divorce proceedings moved to the next stage. Outside the courtroom, I let out a long sigh. My lawyer, standing beside me, offered a reminder. Winning this case might still be tricky. The key issue is that we can't definitively prove the child isn't yours. If she digs in her heels, it could be a drawn-out battle. I nodded. I had already anticipated this scenario and prepared myself for a long fight. As I approached my car and was about to get in, Liu Ryan suddenly appeared, blocking my way. Wait! She bit her lip and asked, "Do you really want to divorce me? What did I do wrong? Why are you treating me this way? Is it because I helped Stanley fulfill his last wish? I did it out of kindness. You didn't lose anything." Hearing her absurd reasoning for the first time, even my lawyer couldn't help but glance at her in disbelief. As for me, I was running out of patience. I handed her a medical report. This is Stanley's health check from last year. I'm sure you'll find it quite interesting. Taking advantage of her stunned expression, I opened the car door and got in. Before leaving, I gave her one last piece of advice. Next time, do your homework before making decisions. Don't let yourself be fooled and end up helping someone else count their money. As we drove away, my lawyer couldn't hold back his question. You suspected Stanley all along, didn't you? That's why you investigated him. Ever since Liu Ryan mentioned that he was ill, something felt off. As a doctor, Stanley's condition didn't match that of someone terminally ill. So I contacted a friend at the hospital and found his medical report from last year. And as expected, I wasn't wrong. Stanley wasn't sick at all. He'd been lying to Liu Ryan for 10 years, and she believed him without a shadow of doubt. She never questioned the validity of his claims. Stanley's lie was actually quite crude. Anyone with basic common sense could have spotted the inconsistencies, but it just so happened he targeted someone like Liu Ryan, a woman whose mind was entirely clouded by romantic fantasies. That's how he managed to manipulate her. A few days later, Liu Ryan came to see me again. She looked thinner, and her mental state seemed fragile. Jin Lee, I've had the baby aborted. Can we start over? I've broken up with Stanley. From now on, it'll just be the two of us. I frowned. You went and aborted the baby? She smiled faintly, still looking weak and frail. Yes, you wanted a divorce because of the baby, didn't you? Now that the baby is gone. You'll come back to me now, right? I avoided her hand as it reached out toward me, speaking with a hint of helplessness. I don't love you anymore. No matter what you do or say, I won't change my mind. Now, can you finally give up? The light in her eyes dimmed, and she cautiously asked, I truly understand my mistake now. I promise I'll never make the same mistake again. Can you forgive me just this once? Looking at the woman I once deeply loved reduced to this state, I couldn't help but feel a pang in my heart. But I stood firm in my decision. Some things, once broken, can never be fixed. There's no going back. Taking a deep breath, I softened my tone slightly. Go home. Don't come looking for me again. Next week is the court date. After that, we'll have nothing to do with each other anymore. Her face, streaked with tears, looked at me with pleading eyes. I don't want a divorce. I want to be with you. I truly love you. Please forgive me this once. I cruelly shook my head. No! She broke down completely, tears streaming down her face. Fine, I understand. I'll agree to the divorce. As I watched her thin, retreating figure, a faint ache rose in my heart. Once, she had been the person I cherished most in the world. Now, she was just a stranger I used to know. I couldn't bear to watch her cry any longer. Turning away, I headed back to work. But suddenly, from the bushes nearby, a figure emerged, holding a knife. Stanley's face twisted in rage. His eyes filled with hatred as he glared at me. It's all because of you. You killed my child. If it weren't for you, Ryan wouldn't have left me. I'll kill you. Today, we die together. Before I could react, Liu Ryan stepped in front of me. A fruit knife was embedded in her chest. Jin Lee, she called weakly. Are you okay? She struggled to keep her eyes open, her gaze filled with concern for me. My heart shattered instantly. The sight of her collapsing left me frozen in fear. All I could do was press my hand against her wound to slow the bleeding. Hold on, I whispered, panic-stricken. Everything had happened so quickly. From the moment Stanley appeared to when Liu Ryan fell, it had only been seconds. Too fast for anyone to process. Even Stanley stood there in shock. He hadn't expected to end up stabbing Liu Ryan. Ryan, why would you do something so stupid? Why would you take that knife for him? Liu Ryan glanced at him, her face serene, even smiling lightly. I finally repaid what I owed you. In the next life, don't ever come between me and Jin Lee's relationship again. I reached out with my other hand, clasping hers tightly. Ryan, hold on. The doctor will be here soon. You're going to be fine. She shook her head, a glimmer of peace in her eyes. It's too late. I'm dying. I'm sorry for hurting you. Will you forgive me? I truly know I was wrong. My heart ached unbearably, as if I were about to lose something irreplaceable. I forgive you, but promise me don't sleep. We still have a long, long life ahead of us. You promised you'd always stay with me. Sorry, I've broken my promise again. Her voice grew weaker. Liu Ryan spoke her final words with great effort, and then she closed her eyes forever. I held her still warm body tightly in my arms, tears falling uncontrollably. How did it come to this? Just moments ago, everything was fine. In just a matter of minutes. How could someone so full of life simply vanish? Stanley, having witnessed Liu Ryan's death with his own eyes, couldn't accept reality. His face was contorted with anguish. He quickly picked up the knife and slashed his own stomach. Blood gushed out instantly. Sensing danger, I tried to stop him. But it was too late. Medical personnel arrived shortly after, but tragically, neither of them could be saved. 2 lives were lost in one night. The incident quickly made local headlines. I became the center of public scrutiny and blame. But I no longer had the energy to care. After burying Liu Ryan, I resigned from my job. The events had left me utterly drained, both physically and emotionally. After settling all of Liu Ryan's affairs, I began traveling across the country. This was something Liu Ryan and I had once promised to do together. But work had always kept us busy. By the time I was finally free, she was no longer here. So I carried her dream with me, letting her see the beauty of our homeland through my eyes. The end.